The thing about drawing is that it's a great way to learn things.
Kent Bonar is certainly a force for nature.
He is a coherent life, and I found that life, worthy of celebration.
Well, it really started on rainy days. I had nothing else to do inside, and I've always been interested in nature. I was a naturalist, since I could walk, and so I was drawing, stuff pretty much early on. Then in high school art class, I took a couple of years of drawing, and our art teacher wanted me to compete in regional art contests in Kansas City and stuff, and I told her the only way I could do that is if I was getting credit for it, because there's a lot of work and stuff like that, and I figured I'd at least be getting credit for it, so they made a third-year art class just for me.
Once Kent completed high school, he attended the University of Missouri and majored in biological sciences, zoology, botany, entomology, ornithology. Traditionally, botany majors were required to take courses in botanical drawing.
I was needing something to go along with the wildlife courses I was taking. I was majoring in wildlife management, and so I needed, a minor to go with it, and I took the art. It was an easy way out, and I had a 2-hour drawing class at night, was how I got started, and it fit into my schedule where nothing else would. So I took that drawing class and pretty much aced it, and so they put me in a graduate course in printmaking. And so I was doing mostly engravings and etchings.
Kent's grandparents were a major influence for him becoming a naturalist. At a very young age, they nurtured a love for the natural world he has based his life upon ever since.
All 4 of my grandparents were really connected with the natural world a lot more than my parents' generation. So my grandpa had me out squirrel hunting when I could barely walk. Also, my other grandpa had me out wading in the creek for him trying to catch crawdads. Grandma Zella was pretty much of a naturalist herself, had her last house surrounded by plants and bushes and trees, stuff like that. She really liked gardening and everything. And so you could look out one window and see a catbird nest in a lilac. You could look out another window and see a robin nest in a hibiscus. Look out another window and see something else in forsythia. All of my grandparents were really tuned into the natural world, and my dad would have been if he'd have had the chance, but Mom kept him busy.
The major inspiration for Kent on a larger level was Henry David Thoreau. While barely a teenager, he immersed himself in Thoreau's writings and initiated his lifelong endeavor to mimic and expound upon those concepts and attitudes.
I really got into Thoreau back in the 7th grade. I read Walden 3 times in a year, and then went from there through Civil Disobedience and Life Without Principle, and and Walking, some of his earlier essays, and just kept trying to find whatever I could of Thoreau's. basically Thoreau is a naturalist, and I really admired him for for the natural, the natural writing that he was doing, and also the fact that he put all that into a philosophical perspective, and and a spiritual perspective, and managed to integrate all that stuff into into the natural world, and explaining a lot of what was going on. He was way ahead of himself on a lot of things. He wrote an essay called The Succession of Forest Trees, which is better than anything the Forest Service has come up with since. And he did stuff on wild fruits, other things like that, and it was mainly talking about symbiosis. He didn't have that word for it; it wasn't coined yet. But he was talking about how life is integrated in all of its parts, and all manages to function as a whole. I got done at the University of Missouri at Columbia. Then I got a job down here in Arkansas as a park naturalist. When I did, I'd moved around to various parks that first year, and so they decided to do self-guided trails. Self-guided trails were a good way to get the public interested in a trail and get them out there. And we didn't have to pay for somebody to be out there on the trail 24/7. The self-guided trail you could use any time. We were only charging $0.25 for the whole brochure, so and that was mainly just to keep them from littering the trail with them.
As a state naturalist, Kent begins working with Edwin B. Smith, the author of the Atlas and Annotated List of the Vascular Plants of Arkansas, the seminal survey of the state's flora, published in 1978. Kent spends 30 years illustrating and annotating Smith's atlas.
I knew Ed, pretty much when I first got down here, and I knew most of the other scientists in this part of Arkansas. At his time, he was like the senior botanist for the state, and more or less had to be responsible for identifications wherever the state had something confusing to deal with. So I was bothering him a lot, bringing in specimens and stuff that I couldn't figure out. And so when his book came out, it was by far the most authoritative thing in Arkansas. And so that's when I started illustrating it, was, as soon as I got my hands on it. It was just, a really good thing to have an actual list that I could work off of. So I had to have something I could take with me. And that was about as lightweight as I could get. There's a lot of problems with that, and that by the time they got around to publishing it, it was pretty much beat up. You could, ask any of them, and that, book was on its way to being destroyed.
I met Kent at the Mullins Library at the University of Arkansas, and he would always come to check out books, and he would have a bag of books that probably weighed 40 pounds, and he would carry it, and he would come in pretty regularly, however often you could have a book, because he was always studying and trying to figure out how to kind of battle some of the things he was against out here in Newton County, and just learn more. I think at the time when we first met, he was studying moths and these types of moths and how they lived in certain trees. And those moths were important because it's what the bats ate. And so everything was connected for Kent, and he really made those connections. As I got to know Kent more over at the library and see his art and really start to appreciate it, I was also spending a little bit more time in Newton County and met people over there who knew Kent and appreciated his art. And they were slightly worried that a lot of that stuff would someday be lost. There were times he would carry it around and, in the rain, or lose it in a creek, or it wouldn't be too far-fetched to think that there could be a fire and it could burn down and all be gone. And so really there was this community push from Newton County and the surrounding area to get Kent's work preserved?
One of the worst things that happened was on Hurricane Creek. We were having a plant workshop down there, and we were having to ford the creek and come in from Highway 123 because it was the only way in. The creek was up, and so we had to ford it to get to the place we were going. And so I was wading in about knee-deep water and hit a slick spot, and it just, the bottom went out from under me, and I went down into the creek. My pack goes with the book in it, goes floating off. And fortunately, somebody else caught it downstream before it disappeared totally. But I spent all night in front of a campfire turning one page at a time trying to dry the thing out. Unfortunately, India ink can take water, or otherwise I'd have had to start over.
Trey Marley recognized not only the magnitude of Kent's work, but also the importance of preserving the thousands of meticulous illustrations and annotations contained within his copy of Smith's Atlas. In 2014, Marley assembled a group of professionals to embark on a 3-year journey to preserve and publish an Arkansas Florilegium, Kent Bonar's illustrated Edwin B. Smith Atlas.
Well, in the time that I would spend with Kent in the library, we'd find a table and he would have his books and his notebooks and allow me to look through them. And I was just amazed by the artwork, and I knew it was something special. And I was luckily in the right place at the university and knew Bob Cochran and knew I needed to get those two together. And I just wanted Bob to see it because I knew he would appreciate the range of interest that this artwork held.
I met Kent through Trey Marley. I knew Trey slightly because we'd worked together on some documentary films. And Trey introduced me to Kent at a meeting at the Fayetteville Public Library. I believe the year was 2014. That's where I first saw the Atlas, and it's where I first met Kent. After meeting Kent, I very shortly knew the purpose of that meeting. And the purpose of that meeting was to somehow arrange and shepherd through the publication of that illustrated atlas by the University of Arkansas Press. And I didn't have any trouble getting enthusiastic about this. I mean, it was a saga. You want the word for it? It was a saga. I mean, here's this man. This fellow I had just met had spent 30 years lugging what I now perceive to be a fairly hefty volume through the woods and entering thousands upon thousands of illustrations at appropriate spots in it. He would draw the plant or seeds of the plant or acorns or the tree trunk or some part of the plant in the appropriate spot in the atlas where that plant was being described.
So most of this work wasn't done, in an art studio or anything like that. It was probably done sitting on a rock in the woods, maybe in the rain, or if he was lucky, maybe it was by candlelight where he lived. But that's an interesting point about his artwork. It was drawn usually in the place that he saw it.
Okay, yeah, it took me right up until the university decided to publish this stuff. I'd probably still be working on it if they hadn't stolen it.
One of the lucky things about this book is that I have a brother who has made his living as a book conservator. And where will we start with this book? We start with this incredibly beat up book. It's got duct tape holding it together. So I call my brother in Indiana and I tell him the basic story about this book. He comes down to Arkansas. He's at the meeting with his partner, who's sort of a paper artist, a person who actually makes paper. So they get involved in the project and unbinds it. And it's very well bound, so that's a laborious thing. And we're lucky it was well bound because it held together for 30 years while Kent was running around in the woods. But my brother unbinds the book, and then get this, his partner, Marilyn, saves all the little pieces of insects and leaves and twigs that come out of that process. In other words, whatever, the fancy word is detritus, whatever little pieces of stuff fall out of the book, she saves And then she makes new end papers for the box that they're preserved. My brother builds a box because they don't rebind the book. After it's unbound, there's a clamshell box that my brother builds specifically to fit this book. And the papers that surround the book are made from scratch by Marilyn, and she puts all that stuff into when it's a liquid, puts all that stuff into the paper and makes it. So the final product, which sits today in special collections, is really, in the most extreme sense of the word, a piece of book conservation. That virtually nothing is lost. No leaves or seeds or fly wings or things like that. They're all in the papers that wrap the book today. So it's there, and it's in all those sort of climate controlled things. And we have, a couple thousand copies of it floating around in the world.
One of the things about Kent, his artwork is amazing, and we're talking about the book, but he also has these note cards, like over 500 note cards of all of the plants that are out in the Ozarks and the Ouachitas, and their location, what they were used for. Again, it's a lot more than just that book. His notebooks, at one point he quit carrying the book into the woods and carried the notebooks just in case. If he lost a notebook, he just lost a little bit, but if he lost the book, he lost a lot. So he has dozens of notebooks with incredible artwork in it. And then the medicinal cards that show the medicinal uses of all the plants of the Ozarks and the Ouachitas, with like little icons referencing, well, this is what the Indians used it for, this is what locals used it for. He also had this suitcase full of drawings he had done while at the state park, including some amazing animals that he had drawn, and I was kind of blown away by that. Whether it was raccoons or rattlesnakes or fish, it just was a different style to his work. And once again, it's kind of folk art, it's science, it's art, it's the environment. It's just really a unique type of stuff.
Being out in the natural world, you're in God's creation, and a person's personal religion is intensified when you can see God's works.
Kent credits his grandmother, Zella Elkins Brendel, with instilling in him a custodial and spiritual view of the natural world. This intense sense of guardianship compels him to actively lobby for its preservation and protection.
Her church believed in stewardship. As the idea that we were here, in the world to take care of it, not just to destroy it.
He really has a passion for the outdoors and making sure that the outdoors is preserved in a good way.
The view that he learned in his grandparents' yard and in the pages of Thoreau gave him a view of the larger world and an appropriate place in it, and a way that he could devote his energies in, what the buzzword would be, right livelihood.
There's really probably some injustices going on all the time, and he's the little guy trying to shed the light on some of the issues, and they're real issues. He connects the dots, and it's hard being one guy out in the woods doing what he does against some of the other larger powers, but he doesn't stop. He just doesn't stop.
I'm not really, there to try to, personally gain anything out of it or anything like that. I'm there to try to accomplish something, which is to save as much of the natural world as we can. In the natural state, I think we should, be, concerned about keeping things as natural as possible. It's a thing where I'm not just, out looking for a fight. There's plenty of those to be had. But I am trying to get, something positive done as far as saving things goes. And it's like, there's continually ongoing problems here in Arkansas and everywhere, really, as far as the environment goes. But, I have to concentrate on, what I can keep track of, and that's mostly here in Newton County in the National Forest.
So, two things: gifted botanical illustrator, prolific, big body of work. Second, clearly articulated vision of the world and one's own place in it tenaciously served. That Kent knew really early on what Kent wanted to do. He combined his grandparents' sort of relationship to the world with his reading of Thoreau, and really precociously, way ahead of most of us, had a good sense of how he wanted to live his life. And then he persevered in that. He did it. I mean, you can't hang out with Kent for a half hour and not realize that Kent hears a beat in his own head. He marches to a different drummer. But what you learn over time is that he hears that drum really well. He knows that cadence, and nothing's going to knock him off his path.
When the sun goes down, he'll light a tallow candle, then spread the old atlas out on his wooden table, and takes his turkey feather quill and dips it in the old ink well, and he draws, and he draws, and he draws. In the margins he draws shaggy old bark of a hickory tree, milkweed pod and sycamore seed, sassafras leaf shaped like a glove, and the feather of a morning dove. In the Ozarks all alone, Kent lives in a shack, except for them 20-some dogs, well, they sleep out back. And he knows every plant in them Ozark hills. Some are good eating, and some cure his ills. So he draws Witsell growing in the summer shade, quenches the thirst like lemonade, ginseng clinging to the mountainside, relaxes the body, restores the mind. When a tree in the Ozark woods falls to the ground, there may be just one man that will hear that sound, while his one good eye sees the whole world divine. There are changes outrunning the fabric of time, and the world has been spinning way too fast. And the gun is loaded and the die is cast. So he draws, and he draws, and he draws. In the margins he draws everything in nature that comes his way. Tiny click beetle